Regardless of the type of vehicle you're buying, you probably have some interest in the suspension system. No doubt you've asked your dealer, how does it ride? How does it handle? Well, that question is even more important when you're buying a wheelchair-accessible vehicle. Consider this. Depending on your personal level of mobility, you could be adding anything from a few hundred pounds of equipment to many hundreds of pounds to your vehicle if you use a large chair or scooter. That weight will make a difference in how your vehicle handles. Just as important is the fact that the ride provided by your vehicle's suspension system can make travel a joy or an exhausting experience. For example, if you or your passenger have limited upper body strength, riding in the back of a van that has a very loose suspension system which causes it to sway and swing can be very tiring, not to mention nauseating. So again, it's important to know what you're buying. Let's take a look at a few of your options. On this vehicle, you can see that the manufacturer has used the original equipment manufacturer's trailing arm. The trailing arm helps to keep the rear of the vehicle from moving left and right around curves and during turns. Now, using equipment that was designed and built for the vehicle by the OEM makes good sense because, of course, you stand a good chance of saving some money. The question is, has that equipment been reinstalled in a way that maintains the function that was designed into the component? For instance, the bracket that it attaches to has to drop down under the floor frame, and you end up with very low ground clearance. That's fairly normal. But what's not normal is that the rear suspension doesn't line up. When parts don't line up as they should, you can pretty much assume that they won't function as well as they were designed to function. Here's another example. Take a look at this spring. Here, they chose not to use the OEM spring to raise the body up. And the spring that they did use, as well as the way everything comes together back here, requires the shocks to be positioned in an odd angle. In other words, the geometry that was originally built into the suspension system by the OEM has not only been changed, but it is all out of whack. The vehicle won't handle or ride the way it was originally designed. And unless you have a chance to take a ride with all of your equipment in the exact make and model vehicle that you're interested in buying, you really won't know what the effect on you or the passenger will be until after you sign on the dotted line. And that's reason enough to demand a test ride. The same is essentially true for this manufacturer. In this case, they've kept the trailing arm a little higher, which is a good thing. In fact, they created a pocket of sorts, so they did some design homework. But there are still issues here in the rear. They replaced the spring with a smaller coil spring, so it changes the spring rate of this vehicle and how it's going to respond when you drive up and down the road, especially during pothole season. They've also angled their shock mount to the point that the dampening properties just aren't going to be what they should be. In other words, you're not likely to have a solid, stable feel when you're riding here in the back of the vehicle. This manufacturer did reuse the OEM's jounce bumper, or snubber as it's sometimes called. In the original vehicle, the snubber would be positioned just a few inches above the seat. With a heavier load, say a 400, 500, 600 pound plus power chair and passenger, that snubber should lower into the pan and firm the ride. If it doesn't do that, or it can't do that, imagine that 400, 500, 600 pounds swaying back and forth on springs as the vehicle rounds curves and turns corners. I think you get the picture. On this vehicle, the snubber, even though it's the original component, is so high above the seat that it's virtually impossible for it to come down that distance to stabilize the ride. Using the original part suggests conformance to the OEM specs, but from an engineering standpoint in this vehicle, it just doesn't work. Now again, every manufacturer faces these same challenges. The question is, how are they overcome? Well, at BraunAbility, they follow the old adage, form follows function. In other words, hundreds of OEM designers and engineers determined how they wanted the original vehicle components to perform. Then they design those components to allow them to function at their best. BraunAbility respects that approach and as a result makes a point of holding as closely as possible to the OEM specifications. Here, BraunAbility created a recess for the trailing arm, so it's positioned as the OEM intended, upwards of the floor structure for best geometry and best performance. At the rear, BraunAbility reused the OEM spring and raised the shock mount to maintain the geometry. That keeps the jounce bumper or snubber in the right position to actually make contact with the seat if and when it's needed to firm the ride. In other words, under heavy loads, the parts that were designed to manage that load will work as intended, and in some cases, even better. I say that because while some original equipment manufacturers design and build their vehicles with load-leveled suspension systems, which are essentially internal hydraulics that automatically adjust to maintain the vehicle trim height under various loads, not everyone does that. And since BraunAbility knows that lowered floor vehicles are subjected to heavier loads on a regular basis, they upgrade those that are not load level equipped with Nivomat shocks, known for outstanding performance to help assure the best ride and handling possible. Whether you're a driver or a passenger, the way your vehicle feels and handles has a lot to do with whether you enjoy or simply tolerate your ride. But don't take my word. Take a ride and see for yourself. The choice is yours.